Welcome to Talk to Me Tuesday on a Tuesday. I'm your host, Mari B. And in this day and age, we are living in history with a lot of things around the world, like the pandemic, job suppression, and even social injustice. I welcome you all to see what topics are important to you and what you stand by. Research those topics and hear your leaders on how they respond. Once you gather all that information, we highly encourage you to vote. Now, today we have a very special guest that has lived through some of these historic issues before that were brought into our nation's light. With those experiences, it encourages many to have a voice and share experiences to ensure we make a change. Without further ado, please welcome our special guest, Latoya. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure, and I know we're really going to deep dive in your journey. But before doing that, and for those viewers that are watching for the first time, tell us a little bit about yourself and what does your normal day-to-day look like?
Absolutely. So I am a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, a sister, a friend, all of those hats that we wear. I'm a lawyer by trade, and I'm also a college dean. I'm the Dean of Graduate Education and Accreditation at North Central University in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so I have added another hat to my many hats. I'm also an author. I just wrote a book that was inspired this summer after the tragic death of George Floyd.
Mm. Yeah, and look, we have a lot and so much to talk about today, especially about that journey and what kind of motivated you to kind of do these walks of lives. So I know you have a lot of hats that you wear, so you really will be able to shed some light. And we want to open up those lines of communication for you guys to have this healthy, open conversation. We want to welcome that because that is what motivates us all to make a difference and go make those changes. So, any concerns or questions or even solutions that you guys have, we want to encourage you guys to leave us in the comment section or even ask those questions. So, Latoya, you did mention a little earlier that you actually have a new release of a book. It's called Be Bold: How to Prepare Your Heart and Mind for Racial Reconciliation. So, let's start from the beginning, right? So, what were the events that led you to this?
So what led me to writing the book was the George Floyd killing. So it was different for me because we all got to see that 8 minute and 46-second long video where George Floyd had a knee on his neck and this grown man called out for his mother. That was a changing moment for me. And so, of course, I've seen injustices before in my life. I've seen police brutality issues and just other injustices for people in our country. But this time it just felt different. Coupled with that, living and working in Minneapolis, the area where George Floyd was killed is minutes away from my home, minutes away from our university. And we were asked to host the George Floyd Memorial here in Minneapolis, and I attended. So that coupled with seeing this video, being present for the protests that were taking place within blocks of my home, seeing the burning of the police precinct and all of the events that took place around it, this time it just really felt different for me, and I felt a call to action that I've never felt before in my life. And so I thought, if I'm candid, I thought just me engaging with my neighbors, with my peers, with people on social media. I started making these videos called Listen and Learn on YouTube, and I thought that that was a way just for me to educate my friends, peers, whoever want to know, the people who had been asking me, what can I do? I thought it was a way for me to give information to people. And frankly, I thought it was me doing more, but there just was more on my heart to do. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep at night. And that's when the book was birthed. And I began to write what I essentially said in the first video. I said, for those who are asking me, what can I do? Here's what you can do. And the four things I said you can do is you can examine yourself, examine your heart. You can listen, you can learn, and you can be bold. And so I expound on those things in the book. And I really do feel that for me, it was a commitment for me to write the book, but it was also a commitment for me to stick to a timeline. I wanted to ensure that the book got out there in the hands of people now, because I feel like the timing in itself is interesting. I don't think it's a coincidence. I've even called it divine that we're sitting in the middle of COVID. And so when George Floyd was killed, so many people were sheltering in place. And so oftentimes we would be on our busy schedules and it would be go, go, go. But this time we had time to listen, time to make a change, time to make a difference. And that's what I decided to do with writing the book.
Right. You literally just hit a lot of amazing points. And I kind of want to touch really briefly on all those points now. You do live in Minneapolis, right? And so do you remember when all this was happening with George Floyd? I'm going to kind of take it back to that. Do you remember where you were at watching the news and all of that and kind of channeling in those feelings that you had? Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I do remember. I remember waking up the morning after he was killed and my husband said there was another police killing. And I was just like, oh, another one is what I'm thinking. And then he said, here in Minneapolis, another one here in Minneapolis. And he said, there's a video that has gone viral. And of course, I'm like, I don't want to watch it, right? And then I hear about the 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And it's hard to watch it because we know what the outcome was. So before watching the video, we knew already that the headline said that he was killed, that he died. So we knew what the outcome would be. But then I brought myself to watching the video. And I can tell you that day, ironically, we decided to take our children to the park, which is right down the street, still in Minneapolis. Wow. And we took our kids to the park. And on our way walking back from the park, my husband said that his eyes were burning. And I said, my eyes are burning too. And we were walking by a new construction. And I ironically thought that it was something that maybe was used on this new construction that was causing our eyes to burn. As soon as we got home, I tuned into the news and I saw what was taking place, that the police precinct where those officers were, where they worked out of, that building had been burned down. That literally is 2.5 miles from where I live. I put it in the GPS because I wanted to know, and it's exactly 2.5 miles away. And I told my husband that was tear gas that had our eyes burning. And if we felt it 2.5 miles away, can you imagine what the impact was there? So then, of course, we eventually took a ride, and I have 2 small boys. So we were strategic about when we took our boys by. And of course, the smoke was unimaginable. Like, you put your window down, the smoke was unimaginable. But one thing I will say is this, and this is not to take any attention from the fact that George Floyd's life was prematurely taken. The media showed still the perspective that they wanted us to see. But what the media did not show was the immediate community of people who came together here in Minneapolis to clean up the area, to not only protest for the injustices that have been taking place, but for change. And also the fact that those groups were very diverse. So it wasn't just the media perspective that we normally get, but it was me being able to see it in real time with my own eyes and actually filter it from my own perspective as opposed to one that's given to me.
Yeah. And, you bring up a very good point, because I was going to say there's a lot of people that had something in their heart. You just mentioned that a little bit earlier. There's something there that you wanted to do more. And some people, that was probably their way of cleaning up the city, protesting, doing more, writing books, having a voice, having a video. There's endless ways on how our community is trying to educate. And there are some that are trying to learn so that they can understand. Now, I want to talk about that feeling that you had, that you just wanted to do more. You did some stuff, but to you, you wanted more. So you wrote a book. And so I want you to kind of tell us about what inspired you to write this book, go forward, and basically say, no excuses, everything aside, I'm doing this.
Yes. So for me, I am a person of faith. So I really believe, and I'll tell you, some of the first words in the book say, you know that God is truly at work when you begin to have sleepless nights. And so when I began writing the book, I didn't say anything to anyone. My husband didn't realize that I was writing the book. And I was about 70 pages in. I set my margin. I was about 70 pages in, and something came up where he mentioned the governor of Minnesota and all that was happening with the COVID numbers, and then now the protesting taking place. And he said, man, I couldn't imagine being this governor right now. And then he said, when he's done, he's going to write a book about it. And so I said to my husband that day, I said, well, what do you think about people who write books when it's current events? And so then he gave his perspective, and I was like, well, what if I tell you that I'm writing a book right now, right? So of course he jumped fully on board, but his question was, when have you written a book in the middle of COVID at home right now with our kids. And I said to him at night when you all are asleep and I can't sleep, for like clockwork for a few weeks, I will wake up at 2 a.m. and I'd be up until 6 a.m. writing. And at 6, I might go back to bed or I would just feel refreshed for the rest of the day. And another thing that this writing did for me, the writing became therapy for me. So I read a quote recently where someone said, when I'm drowning with emotions, that the writing saves you. Like, the writing is like your life raft. And I think that that's what happened with me. And I quickly realized that if I want there to be a change, I can't continue to be quiet because the silence is complicit. And sometimes the silence speaks volumes. And so for me, I can tell you many reasons. And I talk about this in a book, many reasons of why I've been quiet. I saw someone post on Facebook right after George Floyd was killed. And she said, I've been the quiet Black girl because I don't want to be viewed as the angry Black woman. And that resonated with me so much because I know that when we talk about levels of comfort, I'm the person who I'm harmonious. I don't like conflict. And it's like, I don't want to rock a boat. I don't want anyone to be offended by a well-intended message in my book or from me speaking. So the solution would be to be quiet, tread lightly, and not risk the things that I've worked hard for. But then I realized that that is just not acceptable. And if you want there to be a change, you have to be a voice for that change. And that's how I got to writing. And that's how I got to the place where Be Bold is now officially being delivered. My official release date is listed as 11/1, but people purchase pre-sale books and they are beginning to be delivered yesterday and today. So I'm just excited for people to get in and dive deep into the content. But I'm also hoping that people actually are changed by the content, or for the people who feel like maybe they don't need to change, but it's the people around them, that the book gives them resources and tools to be able to tackle the courageous conversations around racial reconciliation that are very necessary for us.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about your process of this goal that you had that you've never done before. So we're going to talk about that. Before we do have some comments. So we have Shannon saying, Be Bold is an amazing book. Highly recommend. Latoya, you are so inspiring. So that you already have a fan here.
Thank you. So let me tell you a little bit about Shannon Foreman. So there's a movement called Share the Mic, and the Share the Mic Minnesota movement is a movement where women of color are paired up with allies. So it can be a white man, a white woman, but typically white women. And so I was paired with Shannon Foreman, and Share the Mic Minnesota, I'm going to give them a shout out. They did a fantastic job with pairing. We immediately just connected. And so what we did was so the idea was she shared her mic with me. So she gave me access to her social media platforms for a day and just introduced me to her network. And she and I went live on those days and just ultimately connected. So Shannon actually was one of my pre-readers. So I ended up sending her a link to the book. So she was able to pre-read the book. And I am just so grateful for her support. She purchased 10 copies of the book and she did a giveaway on the Share the Mic Day. So I'm really grateful. But Shannon is an example of what I think everyone has to do, right? With the whole Be Bold, it's the idea of you being willing to listen to other people's stories and learn from their stories and experiences and recognize the differences that we have that we don't control. I often say we don't control when we were born, what skin we were born in, to whom we were born. We don't get to choose any of that, but we do get to choose the impact that we make and the legacy that we leave behind. So a part of the whole idea of having courageous conversations is being willing to talk to people who don't look like you, people who don't have the same beliefs as you, and just trying to find common ground to be able to boldly move forward.
Yeah, Latoya, well said. You're giving me chills here left and right. So I kind of want to dig deep, but we do have some comments. I do want to get to this. So I have Maria saying, listen, learn, and be bold. Powerful. So you are on to something there. We have Edith saying, thank God for people like you are willing to share their voices. And then we have Darren saying, thank you for coming on the show, Latoya. Your drive and passion for these issues are moving. You are bold. So you have a lot of love right now. And I just kind of want to get deeper. You said a lot of things that look, you've given me a lot of chills, and I kind of want to revisit some of those things. So, you had a lot of inspirations to write this book. You had sleepless nights. And I want to thank you for sharing that story with us, because sometimes people have those sleepless nights and don't act upon it or don't know why, right? And you took the bull by the horns and you said, I'm going to do something about it. You kind of explained a little bit about your title, Be Bold, be in the forefront, go out there, be courageous. You kind of said that in so many ways, in so many dimensions. And I have to ask you, because you do mention your kids and your husband, was your inspiration also because of them?
Well, absolutely. It's easy for me to say I've made it to this point in my life. I've had an opportunity to get an education, and I'm a huge proponent of education and how it can propel you and open doors for you. So I'm aware of that. But I also am aware that everybody doesn't have those same opportunities. I'm also aware that, as you stated, I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I have boys, and my boys will become men. And so when George Floyd laid on that ground and this grown 40-something-year-old man cried out for his mother, I couldn't help but, as a mother, think, when will my 2 little brown boys become angry or big Black men? Now, I don't feel that way, but when society perceives them as that and they're a threat merely by the color of their skin, to me, that was a reason also for me to do something more. My dad is 6'6". My husband is 6'2". My 6-year-old is already 4 feet 2 inches tall. So I know that my boys are going to be taller boys. And I know that my boys are going to come from a certain background. I know that my oldest son is a gentle giant. He's such a loving kid. But at the end of the day, I know that he will be seen as a Black man in America. I have a little brother who he's been stopped by the cops several times. And I want to believe that it's maybe he was doing something, but I can't deny the fact that it's the fear of, what if one of those traffic stops for him turns into something where he doesn't survive it. So for me, I realized that me being bold was not just about me anymore, but it's about everyone who doesn't have a voice for themselves. And I think I've said this before to many people. You might not realize it, but it may be someone who seems set in their ways, and you talking to them, you boldly talking to them, might be you planting a seed. And you might not see the tree grow or the flower grow, but you've planted the seed, and it's up to someone else to come behind you and water that seed and then have it to grow. So I know for some people, just being willing to have these discussions in themselves, that in itself is bold. So being bold is not just the final step. For some people, having the initial discussion is bold.
Yeah, opening up that round table. And that's why we kind of have these shows, to open up these open, healthy conversations. They're healthy, and it's fine. As far as, if you want to change, you have to have that open heart and that open mind. So yeah, I definitely want to thank you for sharing that, because there's a lot of people out there that feel the same way you do, whether it's a husband, a spouse, a brother. You never know what walk of life and who that hits your heart. So now I kind of want to get into that book process, right? So, this is you've never written a book before, right?
I've never written and published a book before.
So let's talk about that process. So how long was the process of writing your book, or did you write it? Walk us through how that even worked out for you.
Yeah, so I can tell you the exact date that I started writing my book. And I know because George Floyd's memorial was in Minneapolis on a Thursday. Well, his Houston funeral was that Tuesday. His memorial was in Minneapolis that Thursday. That Sunday, I recorded a video on YouTube called Here's What You Can Do. And it's just a very informal video where I'm like, for the people who have called to check on me, who've asked, what can I do? Here's what you can do. And I expound on what you can do. By Tuesday, I was writing the book. So I dove right in. I wrote the book, and it took me 2 months to write the book.
Wow.
Well, maybe about a month in, I realized that this is something that I would want to get out. So I started exploring the process of getting it published. So one of the publishers who I spoke with, I asked him, when can we get the book out? And he said to me, you will need 90 days, frankly. So he said, if you get it to me, if you can have it by August 1st, it'll be out by November 1st. And so that is what set me moving there. So for me, I said, okay, I'm going to meet this deadline. I'm going to get this book done before August 1st because it's bigger than me. Also, I'm in higher ed, so things slow down in the summer for us, but then we pick up full speed ahead when it gets to August. So I also knew that I wanted to have this book done before I got distracted with the semester or anything like that. So I met my deadlines and the book is now out.
Look, that's something to be proud of. I know you were really bold and strict on your deadlines. You said, I'm going to do this, and I love it. A lot of people will have goals, whether it's writing a book or just goals. But I have to ask you, did you ever think in the process of writing the book, like, what did I just get myself into?
Well, I will say this for me, initially, I'm a person that I'm an accountability person. So if I put it out there and say that I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. So early on for the book, my husband, when he ended up finding out about it, and I have some girlfriends who I talk to every day, they knew about it. So I'm like, I'm writing a book, they knew about it. And of course, they were my cheerleaders, biggest supporters. But once I actually put the website and information out there, for me, it was no turning back at that point. Yeah. Now, if I tell you that I don't have my moments that I'm like, I had someone recently ask me, are you very vocal about issues on social media that can be controversial? And I said to that person, not necessarily. And then the person said, well, how do you feel about it? And I said, well, I have a book about to come out. So I am about to spill it to everybody. And I do not hold back in a book. And I will say this thing about the book. I say again, the things you can do is you examine yourself. I think a big part of any injustices that take place against people, so not just racially, but any injustices, I think it starts with the person, right? The beginning with you. Excuse me, you have to examine yourself. And so that's why I spend so much time. You can't really be expected to be a different person to different people if you first have issues with yourself that you have to examine. So I spend some time with the book on examining yourself. And then I spend some time going through history, starting with 1619. I know that it's controversial on when the first chattel slaves were actually taken from Africa and brought here. But I start with 1619. And the idea is, and I'm going to quote Brian Stevenson, the person who the book Just Mercy and the documentary is based on, and the lawyer who started that huge movement. He talks about truth and reckoning, or truth and reconciliation. And he says that we'll never get to a place of reconciliation if we can't first acknowledge truth. And so I spent some time just examining history. And I know oftentimes the history is uncomfortable for everybody. Like, we don't like to read about the things that happen historically. But the idea is we can never truly reconcile and move forward if we're not willing to face history head on. And my best advice for that is understanding that history is not our fault, but I say it's our duty, however, to educate ourselves about it and boldly move forward.
Wow. Well said. I love, how you really structured the book to really pick out what people could do, what you can do. And I love that. So I definitely want to encourage people to, if you haven't gotten your hands on this book, definitely go out, because it's almost like a self-healing of each individual person. And your walk of life is different than the person next to you, right? And so I really like how you structured this book, and you kind of also took that time, it sounds like, to reflect on yourself too, on what you need to do to bring it to the next level. Now, I have to ask, earlier you said you have a little brother, and you also have a husband and kids. So not only that, you mentioned that earlier that you are a dean at North Central University in Minneapolis. So have you experienced, been a part of the racial injustice before this tragic event that we just experienced in this year?
Absolutely. I'm a Black woman in America, right? And I hate to lead with that, but I'm a Black woman in America. But the reality is in the book, I have you to go through and just examine the first time you've ever had a friend who didn't look like you, or a teacher who didn't look like you. I have questions for you to think about. And I said to someone recently, I remember the first time I was called the N-word. And I wish I could say that it never happened, but I know I was in second grade the first time that I was called the N-word, right? So the reality is I've seen it happen. The question is, though, what do we do about it? How do we react to it? I think also oftentimes you have people who don't realize that they are biased. And so when we talk about implicit or explicit biases, I don't know too many people who would say, I'm racist. or I don't like people who are X, or I don't like people who are Y. I think most people believe themselves to be loving and accepting, but we don't realize it is not the explicit things that are the problem. It's the implicit things that we do that are actually the problems. The comments that we make, the things that we do, the subtle things that we believe to be subtle that actually are actually louder than you saying to someone the N-word, or you telling someone that you don't like them because of the color of their skin, or because of their sexual orientation, or because of their faith.
Right. And you're right. We have to be very careful, because when something comes your way, you kind of also see how other people react. And
Right.
how other people react becomes a norm, and it becomes justified. It may not be okay, but you kind of also are observant, or how your household reacts to it. So all those things, I do feel like you're right. You have to kind of look at it and see how you want to be bold and have a voice. And when we say be bold, we're not really saying, be combative or anything like that, but just, standing very firm with what you believe in your heart and what you love. I definitely love that you did that. Now, this year, Latoya, has been a tough year. Okay. For everyone. Okay. Some people worse than others. And it's been a tough year for multiple reasons. We are living right now through a pandemic. The cases are going up. And then another tough thing is there was a big movement this year of Black Lives Matter. So, what was one thing for you? Because you named, when that happened, this was another shooting. In your head, another shooting. And then a movement became larger than life, to where it started peeling off the layers. And households were having conversations, and friends were having open conversations. So, to you, what was the one thing that really stood out about this movement?
So I know when thinking about Black Lives Matter overall, and just the fact that they were founded after Trayvon Martin was killed, again with Skittles in his hoodie. And I think that what I've seen happen in 2020 that surrounds Black Lives Matter is the ability to define what Black Lives Matters actually stands for. And even if you don't agree with Black Lives Matter as an organization, I've heard and read some allegations accusing them of themselves being a racist organization. I say, even if you don't agree with the organization, you separating the hashtag from the organization, if that's even possible. I've seen so many questions come up where people respond with all lives matter or blue lives matter, and they feel the need to respond. I call it this defensively to the comment of all lives matter. And I've seen such great analogies to that. So one of the examples is, you respond to, let's say it's a breast cancer awareness, right? And you respond and say, all cancer matters, right? And it's like, of course we know that all cancer matters, but if this month is breast cancer awareness month, we've chosen to focus on that. So you focusing on one thing does not mean that you can't care about other things. So I'll just say this. When people say, well, all lives matter, for me, it is a deeper seated issue that they are not addressing head on. Because the whole idea of Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that people who say Black Lives Matter doesn't believe that all lives matter. But if we don't feel that Black Lives Matter, that means we cannot use an inclusive statement like all lives matter. I say, for me, ideally would be us to get to a place where we don't have to say Black Lives Matter. And frankly, we don't have to say all lives matter either. It's just understood. But, I question sometimes if the issue is really with Black Lives Matter. Like if it said Black Lives Matter also, will people also have a problem with it? Or Black Lives Matter too, will people still have a problem with it? Or do people really believe that the hashtag Black Lives Matter is saying only Black Lives Matter? So I think that what this year has brought is the opportunity to dig deeper and have these discussions about all lives matters versus Black Lives Matter.
And look, that's a great question. And again, we're having a healthy conversation. That's a great question to ask yourself, if you are one of those. Adding an additional word, do you still have that feeling? I do feel like sometimes society will pick apart three words, probably three letters, So at the end of the day, if you add a word or not, there still will be someone in society that may not like it, right? And it's okay that you guys are entitled to your opinion, but let's have an open conversation. I think that is what's healthy, is learning the perspective. You don't have to agree to disagree, right? But just learning that perspective. And so I totally agree. Now, we're getting a lot of love, Latoya, so I have to kind of touch base on this. We have Ashley saying, congratulations on the book. You are such an inspiration.
Thank you, Ashley.
We have Ben saying, very inspiring. What a way to make the most of those sleepless nights. I agree. I have Daniel saying, ordering myself a book right now. That's what we want you guys to do, because this could definitely open your heart and your mind in a way that maybe you haven't been inspired yet. I have Lintrell saying, amazing. So exciting to read my copy. And then I have Liv saying, training our children to deal with and combat those biases is hard work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes. Awesome. So that's definitely totally true. I love the inspiration. I love the love that everyone's giving you. And it's also affirmation to, your goal and those sleepless nights. Like, you are doing something, Latoya, to make a difference. And it's obvious, we do have some group of people that agree. Now, kind of going back to the Black Lives Matter movement, which really shined and is still shining, to be honest, in our society. It's opening up great conversations, some not so great, but again, with every good has to come bad, right?
Right, absolutely.
So how does it make you feel that it took this long for our society, our nation, let's just say worldwide, because there's people worldwide also having these conversations, to peel this layer? How does that make you feel?
I think time is intentional and there's no mistake in the timing of it. So even like I made the comment about COVID, I think that there's something divine about COVID. I think that God intentionally slowed our world down. And then that the death of George Floyd, that the timing of it was divine, that it was very much so intentional. I know after George Floyd died, there were protests not only in every United States of America, but on every continent except Antarctica. So what that let me know was that people are tired and people want a change and want to see a change, right? And so I don't like to see it as, well, about time that we got here, because I personally feel like there is still a lot to be done. I know one of the questions that people often ask is, are we post-racial because we had a Black president? So when Barack Obama became president of the United States, and then when he was reelected for his second term, there are so many people who felt, well, I don't want to hear about racial injustices anymore because we have a Black president now, because Black people are getting good jobs and education, so we are equal. But what they fail to realize is we have not reconciled. So I give the example of this. If you've experienced any trauma in your life, it's common for people to go through therapy. And we never got to do that as a country. We all of a sudden were told you're free. And then we went through this period of Reconstruction after the Civil War. And then we had the Jim Crow era. And then we get to the Civil Rights era in the 60s. And okay, we think that just because the Civil Rights Act is passed, okay, we're all equal and we're all free. But we never had a moment of reconciling, a moment of repentance, a moment of reckoning. And I think that's what our country needs. I quote, and I'm blanking on her name right now, which is awful, but she wrote a book called Post-Traumatic, her name is Joy, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And she talks about some of the traumas that still sit with us as African Americans, even this many years and this many generations post-slavery. And I think until we actually acknowledge and have a reckoning and a reconciliation period, we will never get to a place where it's completely over. So yes, things are happening now and there has been shifts, but I think that there's still so much work to be done. And I think that that work starts with people examining their hearts and having their own hearts soften.
Yes, well said. And I know, look, therapy and getting to a place of reconciliation takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. I know anyone that's watching, if you think it's okay, enough is enough, but it's going to take time. We might be having these conversations for a while, and it's not just Black lives. There's other lives that also may have the same movement. So I think you're right. It's almost like a therapy for our nation. And now I have to ask you this, Latoya. You wrote the book, during the whole movement of Black Lives Matter. Now, I really want to honestly ask you, did you ever think this topic was going to be as big and grand, while you're writing it? Because when George Floyd happened and where it's at now, it was deep for our nation, deep. So did you ever think it was going to be this vivid and present in our lives this year?
In January, I didn't think so. But after George Floyd was killed, I definitely am not surprised that we are where we are and that these discussions are taking place. I've heard several people compare what's happening now to the civil rights movement from the 1960s. So Martin Luther King and everyone who walked with Dr. King. But I like to point out the fact that we have one significant difference that I think is a major difference. We have technology. We have the ability to have something go viral. We have the ability to, I talk about George Floyd's killing. We saw it on someone's camera phone. We didn't have to wait for the building to release their surveillance video. We didn't have to wait for the officers to release their CD dash cam or body cameras. We have social media and we have the ability to make things go viral in a split second. And not only does it go viral, people can comment and react and share. And I think that that's one of the major differences for us. Do I think that there was a lot of things happening in the civil rights era? Absolutely. But what they did was not shared in real time. Initially, it wasn't even shared on the news and media. And then eventually it was shared in black and white, but it was a little bit of a delay and it still had that media perspective to it. So I think that that's one of the biggest things for us right now, the fact that we have access to technology, and that we're so connected, and not just with people in America, but globally. We can connect with people on different continents in real time. And that's one of the things that is making a big difference for us.
Yeah. And look, I agree with you. I think it's beautiful. The technology that we can touch so many lives and really spread the messaging, good, bad, and unfortunately I actually haven't seen the video. I can't.
Yes.
Me personally, some people feel the same way and some people have seen the video. But just having this little device that can really change the outlook of things. It's no longer filtered through the media. There's people like yourself, Latoya, that's having, a platform on YouTube that you're just having an open conversation. This show, we're having an open conversation where we didn't have the luxury to have these technologies. So I definitely agree. I think it's a beautiful thing. It could be used for good. And of course, a lot of things can be used for harm. But definitely channel in and do your research on what is something that you want to accept in your life at the moment of the layers that you're peeling off of yourself right now. So I know you kind of mentioned George Floyd, Latoya, and I want to highlight other cases like Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Rashard Brooks, and even Vanessa Guillen, military. What are your thoughts about these issues that have happened? And did any of this influence even more so your book?
Absolutely. So it's unfortunate that when you say you want to bring up other names and there's no shortage of names. I believe that there's one located in Texas, but there's also one here in Minneapolis located about a block away from George Floyd Square. And it's called the Say Their Name Cemetery. So I took my oldest son there and it's literally tombstones and it is just heartbreaking to walk through, this Say Their Name Cemetery, and you see name after name after name of people whose lives were taken prematurely. I think that to make it even more difficult in the aftermath of George Floyd, I wish that I can say, well, yes, George Floyd was it, and we're moving in the right direction. But there were so many right immediately in the aftermath after George Floyd was killed. And to me, it just let me know that we still have more to be done. I'll also say this, around the time with George Floyd's death, I knew the story of Sandra Bland, but I found myself digging deeper into Sandra Bland's story. Mm-hmm. And I will give Malcolm Gladwell, the author, credit for it because he has a book that's called In Talking to Strangers. And he so vividly opens his book by talking about the police officer encounter with Sandra Bland and Officer Encinia. I didn't know his name until reading the book. And so he talks about the encounter between Sandra Bland and how this mere traffic stop ends up with her being found dead in her cell. And so I know that there's controversy about whether or not she hung herself or whether or not she was killed. But for me, it's so much deeper. Number one, why was she arrested for a failure to signal? Number one. Number two, let's say she did commit suicide. Why was there paraphernalia in her cell for her to be able to commit suicide with? There's so many questions about the Sandra Bland story. And I think what Malcolm Gladwell does is he brings out a point that we have to be able to start having discussions and seeing people as human beings and not just as some random stranger that we encounter. I can say this: I didn't do it because I dove right into the book, but with the Listen and Learn series, I did a series of videos where I talked about issues that are popular in around this topic. So I talked about Juneteenth in Tulsa. I talked about educational inequity, health disparities, environmental disparities, voting rights. I talked about all of these topics. And then I said, I'm going to come back with another informal season. Well, my plan all along, when I took my son to the Say Their Name cemetery, my plan was for season 2 to be dedicated to people who have lost their lives. And so I have a spotlight where I'm telling you who Sandra Bland is. I'm telling you who Philando Castile is. I'm telling you who Trayvon Martin is. But again, not just the names that got a lot of media attention, but the other people who died, whose names we may not have known, right? And for me, I want the movement to be, not that I want to give these officers praise. I want their names to be known too. I want Brian and Cinia to be known as the officer who pulled over Sandra Bland. I want it to be known who the officer was who had his knee on George Floyd's neck. Because what I want is, when all is said and done, in the event that they're not convicted, charged and convicted, I don't want them to be able to go on with the luxury of their lives because their names were not known. I want to know the officers by name who went in with that no-knock warrant to Breonna Taylor's home. I want to know their names too, so we can send the message that it's not acceptable. We're not just going to accept these debts, but we're not also going to allow you to comfortably be able to go on to the next season and chapter of your life.
Wow, that's very powerful. Again, you gave me chills again. So whether it's your second season of the videos that you have, or even if it's a second book, Latoya, I think that is a great idea to really highlight. And coming from someone that's an attorney, you're looking at things from a different perspective as well. And I think that's powerful, not only to recognize and respect the lives, but also to look at what happened from all angles. So you're looking at the story in a 3D light and not in a 2-dimensional. I love that. I do have a couple more comments. So I have Liv saying, I also like the analogy, if your home is on fire and your neighbor says, my home is important to the firefighters, who you want them to stop putting the fire out on your home to admire your neighbor's home. The lives of Black people are on fire. We have to deal with what is happening to Black peoples in this community. So what is your thought about, have you heard that analogy? Let's start off with that.
I have. I actually use that analogy in my book as well. And so I think that is a great point. It's like, of course, at this moment, all of the houses do matter, but this house is on fire. And I think it is a very good comparison to, yes, right now, all lives matter, but Black lives, our lives are burning. They're on fire. These issues are some that we cannot afford to put on the back burner or share the water for right now. I've also heard it from a spiritual lens, like if you know the Beatitudes in the Bible. So the blessed are the poor in spirit. If you were to respond and say, no, Lord, blessed is everybody, So I think the takeaway is you can care for more than one cause at a time. Wow. And if I'm just candid, when I hear people respond with, well, all lives matter, I take it as a defense mechanism. And for those people, I would say you need to search deeper for what is it? There's something that's deeper rooted that's causing you to respond that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I definitely want to make a correction, because I did just name a few people, but I will be honest. And as Latoya already mentioned, there's a lot of lives. And there's a lot of lives that have been lost due to very unfortunate situations. There's names that we probably don't even know because it wasn't put on this device. So definitely educating and watching the news and paying respects to those people that didn't deserve to die. There's a lot of those names. I definitely want to be clear. Have another comment. Lintrell is saying, keep educating, keep inspiring. You're amazing. Thank you for being bold.
Thank you, Lintrell.
Yeah, so just kind of moving on now. For those that are watching right now, they're kind of hearing a lot of what inspired this book, what really got you deep into this cause, and what that feeling was in your heart. Now, give us a short synopsis for those that are just interested. You already got them locked in, but just kind of deep diving into the book and just the layout of the book. A short synopsis of if someone is interested in the book, or if someone who may need to see it, what is what's happening in the book that they may want to get their hands on.
Right. So I'll say this about the book. I believe that when we talk about racial reconciliation, the topic in itself lets us know that there's something that needs to be done. There's something that needs to be reconciled, right? And so I encourage people, yes, I believe that the journey to racial reconciliation is a part personal. So you have to examine yourself. But I also believe the next step is once you've examined yourself and you're ready to have these courageous and bold conversations, you then should do it with a group. So I encourage everyone to read this book with a group. I call it your growth group, because the hope is you grow as you read this book. So if it's really divided into, if you will say, 4 main parts, of course, the whole first, examining yourself and your heart. I take you on a journey of digging deeper and examining yourself. And then to your story, I share a little bit about my story and my background and upbringing. And I talk specifically about instances that I've had in my life. And then the listen and learn, they're kind of intertwined. So the next section I have, we go through a history lesson, and it's only a chapter, but a history lesson as it relates to African Americans in America. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes I'll hear people say, why do we focus on Black and white issues when there are so many different races and cultures in this country? And I absolutely agree. And I respect diversity and everyone being respected. But naturally, we can't deny the sheer history of racism and how it relates to African Americans. Mm-hmm. So I focus on the historical chapter from the lens of the African American perspective. The next section of the book is where you really can dig in with your, what I call, growth group. And the next section is divided, is 10 questions. So in addition to what can I do, I normally get asked 10 questions, not just 10, but I narrowed it down to 10. Mm-hmm. And so I'll give you an example. We've been talking about it a lot. One of the questions is all lives matter. So why do we say Black lives matter? So I dive into that. Another question is, like I've already said, we've had a Black president. Aren't we post-racial? Another question I have is, I'm not racist. So why does this apply to me? Or another question is, I'm uncomfortable. This topic makes me uncomfortable. Why do we have to talk about it? So I have 10 questions where I give you an answer to the question. I tell you resources that you can watch or read or listen to, depending on the different way that you like to learn. And I end each of those chapters with questions for you to dig deeper with your growth group. And I say in the book, I'm only one person and I'm only one perspective. So you should do this with other people. The more people, the more you can grow. And then the final of the 4 is to be bold. So once you've done all of that, I say to you, now that you have this information, you should be bold and share this information. You should use your time, your energy, and your resources to make sure that you're getting the message out. When you see an injustice, you call it out in any circles. When someone says something that's not okay, you speak on it. And even though be bold is the final step, again, this is a cyclical process. It's not this one training or this one read. It's a cyclical process. And I recognize for some of us, being bold might be our first step. Like you actually picking up the book and saying, I want to do this hard work called racial reconciliation. That might be you being bold there. And then you circle right back around to being bold. It's a cyclical process.
Wow. If you're not inspired to go get that book, wow, I'm definitely going to go right after the show and get that book, because I think it's great how you've laid it out. And I love that you said, I'm one perspective. Go do the same exercise with your peers, with your colleagues, with your neighbors, because you can get another perspective that can maybe make it click for some people. So I definitely love that. And another thing you said, Latoya, is growth. Along with growth, that's also very important, is change. And change in voting. So I want you to kind of tell us a little bit of how voting can help in the topic of social injustice.
Yes, voting definitely is something that matters. If nothing else, I like to think about the history and the fact that people who look like me always didn't have the right to vote. So, if nothing else, you should not only show up to vote, but get informed on the issues. And again, technology. We have resources available. If you want to be informed about the topics that are out there and how you should vote, not only on the national platform, but on your local elections and the things that impact your school board or just other walks of life, I would encourage you to make sure that you are informing yourself, checking out your ballot in advance, and informing yourself about what's on the ballot, who's on the ballot, and actually going out and exercising your right to vote. I do know that there's a lot that's taking place right now that is making voting not so appealing. The long lines or a lot of the tactics that are taking place. But I encourage you to know that your vote does matter. And everyone, please go out and vote. And I would encourage you, if you can, don't just rely on the mail voting because there's been some tactics around that. I encourage you to find out about your early voting options and get out there and vote because our voices matter. And if we want to see a change, we have to actually go out and vote.
Yes, I agree. And if you guys have any questions, we also have some previous shows, even 2 weeks ago, that you guys can kind of see. We put a lot of resources on there that you guys can find out, have your plan ready to vote. And I know education leads to change. You've got to educate yourself. Knowledge is power. So, Latoya, thank you for educating. And for those that are wondering, okay, I'm convinced I want to buy the book. Where can they go find and purchase your book?
Great question. So the book is available on my website, www.theboldlatoyaburrell.com. The book is also available on Amazon, but it's cheaper on the website. And also the website offers you the opportunity to do bundles because, like I said, I recommend that you read this book with people who you can identify as your growth group. So it is available there. The Kindle version is also available, and I can let everyone know that this weekend on Friday, October 23rd through Sunday, October 25th, the Kindle version is going to be $4.99. So if you want a deal, the Kindle version will be on sale this weekend for its launch. It just officially launched yesterday when the books began to be delivered. So I would love, and I would say this as well for everyone who's purchasing and supporting the book and who's have already supported the pre-sale. Thank you so much. I want to hear from you all. So I have that info contact on my website. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions for me. I know we're in a virtual space, but I welcome the opportunity to, if you have a book club that's virtually meeting or a group, I welcome the opportunity to Zoom into that meeting and be able to just give more perspective on the book and just overall have dialogue.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I love that you're so open to talk to any type of walks of life that we're talking to right now. So definitely go get your copy of your book, not just for you, but also for your group of friends. Visit the website that's on the screen as well as in the comment section. I think it's important. And Latoya, you're willing to just be an open book. They can reach you, which is super, super important. Now, all of our guests, I know we kind of come to an end, and I wish we could have some more time with you, but I always ask every single one of our guests if they had to leave our viewers with some words of wisdom or some motivational words, or something just in relationship to your quoting your book, what would you leave our viewers that are watching right now with?
I think for me, the thing that anytime I get a platform, I talk about love. Love is the key. And I think that it's the easy answer. And I know for some people, you might think, well, I love people. I don't hate anyone. That's easy. But I do think that a lot of the issues that we have as human beings, it stems to love. And not only loving people, loving others, but loving yourself. And a part of being able to love yourself is actually understanding who you are. And like I said, I'm a person of faith. So for me, it's understanding whose I am and who I am. And if I can love, like the Bible says, quoting scripture, those, love your Lord, your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. For me, that means that's three people that need to be like three larger groups, and that encompasses everybody. So if I can love God, and then I have to love myself and love my neighbors like I love myself. So I think the biggest thing is you searching deep into yourself and figuring out, are you truly loving yourself? Are you truly loving your Lord? Are you truly loving others? And if you're not a person of faith, like I say, we all have emotions. We all have hearts. Are you loving yourself and are you loving other people? Simple as that. And if you're not, I would encourage you to examine what could it be that's preventing you from displaying that love for others. I think that many of the issues that we experience as human beings stem from the lack of love.
Wow, that's super powerful. So thank you, Latoya, for coming on the show and giving all these perspectives from you coming all the way from Minneapolis. So I want to thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's a pleasure. So as many of you guys have seen, today was about Latoya's book, To Be Bold. And being bold means growth. Being bold means change. And to really go out there and making a difference. Let's have these healthy conversations and really peel back those layers. So it's up to you to discover yourself. It's up to you to make those change. So be bold and make those changes as well. So I want to thank you guys all for tuning in to Talk to Me Tuesday. I want to thank you guys for sharing the show. The more you share, the more we get to educate someone. Knowledge is key. So I want to thank you. I'm your host, Amadi B. Until next time.